you're dealing with. So, and I'm like, that doesn't make it any easier. It makes it harder sometimes because you realize this is really hard. This is not something that's easy. This is not a quick fix. This is not, if this man has a personality disorder, this is not going to be cured. This is something that is a part of his DNA. And he is choosing to abuse me. And choosing not to abuse others. Like, I am chosen for this. And that hurts. So, joining this support group really helped open my eyes about the fact that this is a real problem. That there are women all around the world that are dealing with this type of treatment from their partners. The isolation is unreal. We don't talk about it at all. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because we live in a world that's misogynistic and doesn't take women's issues seriously. And that's not to say that there are no male victims of narcissistic abuse, but it's overwhelmingly affecting women. And that makes it seem like a woman's issue, which in our society isn't much to think about. I wanted to read something about intermittent reinforcement that I found online. It's on a website called feelingishealing.co.uk. And I'll read this part about what intermittent reinforcement is. Intermittent reinforcement is a term that originated from B.F. Skinner's theories on operant conditioning and behaviorism. Skinner carried out studies with rats. When the rats pressed the lever, they were rewarded with food each time, which is continuous reinforcement. After a while, the researchers changed the parameters of the experiment. The rats were rewarded with food in an unpredictable pattern. Sometimes pressing the lever would reward them with food, and other times it would not. The pattern was completely random, so the rats could not predict whether they would receive the reward or not. The result of this was the rats became obsessed with pressing the lever. After a while, the researchers changed the setup again so that there was no reward at any time when the rats pressed the lever. They were expecting that the rats would give up pressing the lever. However, the opposite occurred. The rats continued to press the lever obsessively, even neglecting their own hygiene and other needs. This mirrors what happens in an abusive relationship and goes towards explaining why such a relationship is harder to leave than other healthier relationships. We become addicted to trying to get the narcissist to behave in a safe and sane way. This phenomenon also explains why it takes longer to get over an abusive relationship once it's ended. This is because the relationship is, by nature, not a relationship, but an addiction. Intermittent reinforcement is the most powerful motivator and manipulation tactic. In an abusive relationship, the abuser will mix episodes of love in the mix of the abuse. The victim is so worn down and starved of affection that by the time they receive a scrap of love, it feels like a nirvana. This feeling is created by the release of dopamine. The victim then associates the abuser with this feeling of relief from their pain, even though the abuser caused the pain in the first place. We desperately hang on to the hope of the narcissist's promise that he or she is a reformed character. This causes a trauma bond, which is a very strong sense of bonding with an abuser. This occurs because of the abuse rather than in spite of it. By leaving such a relationship, the physical body is forced to go into withdrawal, just as a drug addict does when they come off of drugs. Intermittent reinforcement is a serious threat to your health and well-being. As we saw above, it led the rats to completely neglect their own self-care. These patterns will leave you feeling confused and unable to make sense of anything because the behavior does not make any sense. It is illogical. So I just wanted to share that. This is what it feels like, and I've been really trying to give myself grace because I am so frustrated with myself, wondering what it is about me that would allow me to love someone who hurts me like this. But the reason why I love or I feel some connection is because he didn't always hurt me. I have been experiencing hot and cold treatment for years, and I thought it was because my partner was moody. It wasn't. I thought he was moody and he was dealing with stuff on his own. I didn't think it was a form of abuse. But it was his passive-aggressive way of acting out, lashing out against me. He never yelled. His voice was never raised. He never physically threatened me. I always felt safe, but I have to admit that I think there were times when I felt uneasy. And it was based off of those moments when we'd be spending time together one-on-one, and there'd be silence, or he just seemed moody. And that was one of my things that I noticed about him. I was like, damn, he's so moody, and he just doesn't ever seem to be happy or satisfied with life. So it had been years that I had been experiencing this. And it was only after he got caught that I became hypersensitive to it, noticing the changes in his communication patterns, the way he looked at me. There was annoyance in his eyes and frustration, and his eyes would blink so fast when I would be talking to him. And then he'd say, "You're talking at me, that's why I'm doing this." And then we talk, and I try to converse with him, level set with him, and his whole body would be turned away from me. He wouldn't look at me. When I'd say, "You're not even looking at me." And he'd say, "I listen with my ears, not with my eyes. Why are you trying to control me? Why do I need to look at you?" And then I would remind him that we are in business together, and that I see how he interacts with clients and colleagues, and that he seems to always make eye contact with them. And his voice is always so calm and collected, and his tone is warm. And then there's no response. No acknowledgement of facts that he was treating me different than everyone else around him. And if he did acknowledge it, it was most certainly because he was blaming me for something. Well, if you wouldn't just sit there droning, I wouldn't have this attitude. You talk at me. All you do is talk. All you want to talk about is this relationship. He didn't talk to me at all after a while. And I learned that that was the experience that a lot of these women were getting. Lots of neglect, indifference, anger, hostility, infidelity. I wasn't alone. And it was bittersweet. I had someone I can talk to, people I could talk to and cry and share my experiences every day without them getting tired. Sometimes I'd be on 3-4 support groups a day throughout the day just to cope. I was in this new place and I was disappointed to learn that people just didn't reach out. Very few people put themselves in my shoes. One, of experiencing the level of trauma that I had experienced after my wedding and having my heart broken like that. And then being humiliated and learning that everyone else in our lives knew but me. Then being pulled and pushed like a yo-yo. And being desperate to find my way back home. Sleeping on people's couches, taking classes, trying to figure out how I could break away and start over. And then finally breaking away. And then the pandemic just closing in and stopping me in my tracks. And then having to go back home after that. No one seemed to understand what that felt like for me. How isolating it was. To be going through that and to have people not understand that I was being abused. And part of the reason why I guess they couldn't understand it was because I could not call it that. Because I kept going back. I kept going back to the person that was hurting me the most. Because he had shelter. He owned the company that I worked at. And he was the person I would have to rely on to agree to a reasonable settlement in a separation, because we had only been married for months and nobody would take my case. I had nothing. I had no rights to anything. So I needed I needed him to come to the table, and we needed to come to an agreement on what a separation would look like if we got there. And he avoided that so much, because the other thing with narcissistic people, they don't like being left. They don't like letting go. They don't want you to get out of their lives. And he knew that if I had that separation agreement and some means to support myself, that I would leave and never look back. I would find a way to move on. And so what he did was he made sure I didn't have a way to move on. And then he started acting as if he wanted to work things out. Every time I got close to leaving and getting ready, he would always, I'll work on this, but is this what you want? You really want to end this? Is this what you want? And I would say to him, no, this is not what I want, but you're not doing anything. You're not improving the situation. You're not doing anything to make this better. So I don't feel like I have a choice but to leave you. I love you and I don't want